Hello, my name is Antonio, and I want you to know that I'm so happy you stopped by Outside Grid to listen to me say thanks to you that make you so happy. I love when you're happy, so I make you happy a long time. If you go hit the like a button and then subscribe, because Antonio will be so happy to you. Just because you help. I have nothing but the powdered milk, and I appreciate having more than powdered milk because you make me so happy. I want a Lamborghini. Now I drink a powdered milk and eat the cornflakes, but someday I want to have a Lamborghini. And one time, if you make me so rich, I have pull a guest and you can ride in Lamborghini with Antonio, and we make happy more. See? Okay. I listened to this story on NPR a few years ago. I used to listen to NPR all the time. In fact, whenever there was no such thing as my Apple device, which I could listen to in my truck, whatever I wanted to listen to, yeah, I listened to NPR for years and years. And I heard this story about no quiet places on Earth. You know, everywhere you go, there's a roar of a plane, and you know. But I remember times, and it's very few, and one of them was just a few minutes ago, that I heard nature, just a quiet moment. It's kind of like Dennis Leary was talking about with happiness and fun. It's like you eat a cookie or whatever. It's just these little quiet moments of happiness that come to you. Well, anyway, some of the things that I thought about with these little quiet moments was one of them was in 1994, and I never will forget it because it was like this. It was real warm, like in the 80s for several days, and the only reason I remember it is because of the fact that I took notes on it. There's a notepad I found from that year. It was in February, and I don't have it in front of me right now, but anyway, I was taking notes about the shadow from the memorial classroom building that I was in, and where the shadow was at and the temperatures. And then the next page in the notes was just talking about how this huge ice storm came. And I talked about walking outside. You know, this is a 22-year-old Brad, you know. That would have been 22. So I was 22 years old, and I walked outside, and I was just noticed how quiet it was. That was 30 years ago, almost. Think about that. So I walked outside, and it was just quiet. Now you're going to hear birds in the background and some noise over there from somewhere else. But then it was just total quiet. The only thing you could hear crunching, the only thing you could hear any at all, period, was me crunching where I walked. And I'd take a step, because it was ice and it was thick. There was nothing. No planes flying. No animals making noise, because everything is bundled up. Everything is hidden. It's like cold. It's tons of ice on everything. Everything's in shock. It's like, what in the world is going on? And it was just death, quiet, nothing. Well, it wasn't exactly like that, what I figured or felt just then. I was out here by the fire on this Sunday morning. The birds were singing. There was no dogs barking. It was just quiet, just the birds and the sound of the fire. And I just sat there for a moment. There was one there too, huh? And you can hear the fire. You can hear like a little piece of wood on the fire that had been burned through fall. And just a nice little fire. And the birds singing. That's one of those moments, I can handle those all the time. When you get into your 50s, it gets crazy. And you got all this stuff going on with kids. And some people have grandchildren and life and this and that and the turmoil and the bucket. Just the drip from the bucket, I was thinking about out here the contrast, of where I'm at. I live in a, it's a, little residential area with trees and leaves and, it's, I would call it Zen-ish, except for the kids that leave balls and trash around. It's a never-ending process. But, and then I travel quite a bit and have, and sometimes I'm downtown in a big city and I look up and I see these big buildings all around me and I think, somebody owns that. That's the way of life, That's where they spend most of their time, probably, or have, or somebody does, supporting it. So it's just a contrast of where you can be. And of course, I've been other places too. One of my favorite places to go, due to this sound thing that I heard on the NPR, story so many years ago of this. You're just talking about the very few quiet places you can find. And there was a guy on there that was recording nature, just nature without man. Of course, you can argue that, man is a part of nature. I mean, we belong here. We came out of this earth, We're part of this system, We weren't injected here, unless the whole thing was injected here. Because we can't live without the rest of it. I can't live without the air. Without killing and eating. I don't care. Whatever I do, I gotta kill to eat. Yeah, I want it fresh. I don't want roadkill, I could probably survive like that, but that's not the way we survive. We either kill or kill by proxy. So I'm at another part of the property now. Today is February the 26th. There's a morning, MOURNING, dove to the left of me. And there are turtles swimming in the pond to the right of me. Birds flying over. Ooh, singing songs. Mucho bueno. But I was going somewhere else earlier. I had to get cut off. I got cut off by somebody. Coming up. I can't remember what it was about. It's about something, wasn't it? That was before church. It's after church now. Let me think about it for a while. Anyway, I'm sitting on my front porch now. And I see a squirrel. I see a robin. And I see 4 ducks. And they're just kind of easing up on me. Because I've been trying to feed them. They're kind of like neighborhood ducks. This neighborhood needs ducks. We need to have ducks. And of course, I got one of the only ponds. Then, 200 or 300 acre area, which means I have the most snakes, water muskins, cottonmouths. I do not like to see them, but I like to see these ducks. Can you hear them? They're eating now. I have a big front yard. I actually mow this yard diagonally. So, I don't know. I think it changes things. It draws in the animals. It's like the misnomer there. It's like the spice in the soup. Salt in the stew. Of course, you know, the best of all people call the salt of the earth. But anyway, I sit up here and I have these fabulous little creatures. There's another robin there now. So there's 2 robins and 1, 2, 3, 4 mallards in my front yard. I guess that's what they are. At least 2 of them and maybe 2 other things. But it also could be like the genders. These genders with ducks is hard to decipher. It is for me. Oh, there's another squirrel. Squirrel 2. Squirrel 1 has already passed through. I give him safe passage. I give all of them safe passage. I don't care. I want all these animals to come and hang around me. Except for my dogs are outside. Oof. Dogs are detectors. Of course, you want them to understand the squirrels. Uh-oh. We got 3 of these rats in one tree there now. And this must be breeding season because they're like chasing. Look at that thing. He's grabbing it. Grabbing that tree. His arms extended wide open. So fast up that thing. So my face right now, speaking of scratches, I have scratches on my face from my dog. I've never trimmed these things. I just like it. They usually wear down, if you keep them busy, But my dogs are mostly inside now, right around the house here. It's more dirt, a little bit of concrete here and there, but, they're mostly, when they're barking at something, they're on a runner of some sort, and they're, in dirt. So they're not really squealing it off. They're not out there in the woods. They're not in the jungle. They're not on the concrete, the road, highway. Click, click, click. That's what I hear through the house. I don't know what that's telling me. Should I figure out how to trim? Or should I put the dogs in other situations? These are the things you think of sitting in the front porch, on the front porch, in the porch swing, with the screen down. February day, 70 degrees, watching ducks feed in your front yard. Mucho bueno. This is so good. Got a fire over there. It's been burning for a few days. There's a lot of trees that fall on the property, just to clean them up. is a never-ending task. I always talk about it. Like I always wanted to live out, on a property that had big trees. I finally got it. I mean, I worked for it, prayed for it, in my mind envisioned it. Of course, I was just looking at it from the outside. I was driving down the road, looking at that, going, man, I like to have that. But I didn't know what it was like to actually own it. When you own it, there's so much work. If you own a property with lots and lots of trees, the Native Americans call them the giving ones. They give. You don't take too much from them. You cut them all down, you can't build any more houses. You're going to have to start extracting stuff from the earth and heating everything up and making lots of noise. But, if you live in balance with the trees, then you can live an abundant life. Because as long as there's trees, it's kind of like rocks. But trees even more so. You got a tree, you got life. You got a way to eat. You got some squirrels and birds and pine cones and deer and, everything that takes refuge in a tree. A tree's a mighty shelter. I live under a bunch of them. Dangerously close to some. But I like them. I don't want to cut them down, I love trees. I love wind flowing through my trees. There's a certain part of my land, part of my front. I can go up under on a windy day and hear wind rush through pine trees. And, man, you've never heard ducks fly over pine trees, those needles. If you've never heard wind fly through pine trees, well, you need to go do that. And while you're there, you need to shut the F up, and just listen, because there it is. There's the answer to all those questions you ask. Those things are, that's the down here where I'm at. If you live amongst the evergreens, you need to go check those evergreens out because they got some answers. Some dangerous places where they reside. You're going to have to go way deep to find some of these elders. And I'm not talking about the planted ones. You don't want the planted ones. Go there and understand them. Yes, that's a requirement, but that's not the whole story. It's only part of it. Living amongst the trees and the wild ones, the Jesse James trees. You got to go way down there in that conservation. You got to go way deep. You got to go to the places where, where the water falls at the very end and coagulates into one thing. And the sounds you make there are different. Because you're not hearing the same things. There's no vibrations. Not the ones that we hear. There's no creatures. Not the ones that we hear. It's a different world, So, be careful out there. I had to go back and listen. I'm very sorry about that. Ha 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 ha. Not So while I was sitting here looking at the turtle swim in February, which is, I guess, in some ways, es mucho bueno to me, because I love to have turtles and I love it to be warm. But I went back and I listened, and it's like one of my favorite places to be. And I wasn't talking about earlier in the vein of quiet. Very, 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 very quiet. And I need it sometimes because, I live inside of places that are not so quiet. I always have. With music, with inside of buildings. People always talk about, well, I tell you this. It's easy work being in an office. Well, I'm going to tell you this. It's, it's better than a lot of things you could do, but it's not without, injury. A lot of times you can't walk. You're tied to a device. Typically, if you're doing the type of work that a lot of us do, you can't just work on a phone. You can work on a phone if you're like a certain YouTube creators or Instagram people, and you make a little video in your bathroom and you're smoking this whatever, and you're talking about this makeup doesn't work and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, for sure. You can make your living with that. But some of us can't. We got to go out and get to beefier machines, man. But anyway, so back to the reality that I was trying to describe, and that is a preserve. It actually, I'm going to tell you this. So, there are certain places you can go to that are very quiet, that are, re-energizing if you are even just a little bit introverted, but also there's something that some of us have. There's a whole bunch of us. I think it's most of us, but we get charged up. It's like our batteries get low and we get charged up from being in nature, being outdoors. I'm one of those people. I have to be outdoors some. And over the years, I've as I've gotten older, I try to stay more active. And of course, even from my 30s on, actually, I've always been active, but I like to stay active and I like to move. I like to go. So, and I like to have some kind of a spiritual experience with things, with nature, because I studied Zen for years and years, and I've got to go to certain places that just help accentuate feeling that I'm alive. Because all the time, I go to my church, I go to wherever else I hear about death and sickness, and I see it in wrecks and it's newspapers and it's just all this negativity all the time. It's just noise. It's kind of like that Guns N' Roses song, like, Axel, all you do is just all this noise everywhere. It's just all the time. It's just, yes, do this, burn, baby. Aye. But when you get a certain age, you're like, I don't want to hear it. And 40 was a pretty big year for me with it, but I'd always been going down to this place, this preserve, this conservation area that I'm trying to explain. But I can't get there because I got to set the context. And the context is always complicated to describe because you got to understand where you're at to understand it, to understand where you're at. It's kind of like Alan Watts always described it. You got to get outside of your box and stand and look at your box to understand what kind of box you're standing in. If that's the only box, if the only thing you know is standing in your box, projecting it outwards, you don't really understand your box. You've got to get outside of the box. You got to get outside of the grid. You got to get out here to understand what you're in. If you're in the grid, you got to get outside of it to understand it. But anyway, so there is this place that it used to be back in the 70s and 80s. It was a place that was, my family had a camp down there on the river. And it's going to sound a lot like Deliverance, and it kind of is in some ways. But so it was these people, these river people that lived in the middle of the hollows. And that was us. And we were down there for years and years and years, hunting, fishing, swimming, just doing everything right there on that Saline River, on that land. And then, times changed and people started conserving and doing things differently with things. And, there's still a couple of camps down there that are privately owned. But several years ago, all of the property was bought up, by a conservation. And of course, I'd been there, going there for years before they purchased it. And I just walking there the long way. It's like that song, "Take the Long Way Home." My son's here. But now, this preserve, though, means a lot to me because I spent a lot of time with my uncles there in this camp zone. They're all dead now. They no longer exist on this planet, but I still can walk by this area, and then I feel their spirit. I remember my childhood. I remember my time with them, and of course, it brings back all kinds of memories. So it's a very spiritual place. But that whole area, it's like a 3-mile walk through the woods, untamed woods now. It's been 20, 30 years or so before really anybody's been there. 30 years at least before people have really spent a lot of time there. I'm talking about like 2 or 3 humans to be on the area in 30 years, and they're not doing a whole lot. Their footprint, to use, modern nomenclature, is not very heavy. You won't even find it really. But anyway, so like for years, I'd go down there as a kid, and we'd drive in with trucks, and we'd get down there, or we would get in a boat from Longview, which is up the river, and we would drive down to Horsehead. And that's the place that you'd walk to, that I'm trying to get to right now, because there's camps and stuff there that lead the way to Horsehead. But to get to Horsehead from what would be called Mouth of Creek, or a part of the country where all the camps were located, you got to get out. You got to get outside of the grid. You got to get way out there to understand what Horsehead is, particularly if you're coming into it from that direction, because it's a quest. You got to go down to the dock. You got to go load up with your boat, and you got to go downriver to get to Horsehead. And of course, it's Horsehead because if you look at it from the sky, it's shaped like a horse head. It's I don't know when they called it that, but I guess you can see it from the ground too. But you can really see it from the sky. But anyway, so this area is hidden. I mean, it's deep, deep, deep in the hollow. The forest. It's been a preserve forever by humans. Being private land, it was never cut out because it's near water, and you can't cut near water. But I mean, what I'm trying to describe to you is a place deep, deep, deep in the forest near a river. It's within that 5 or 10 mile zone around the river, and it's snaky. It's all kinds of animals come there. There's every mammal you can imagine, every reptile you can imagine, every amphibian. I mean, rodent. I mean, it's all right there. Everything you can imagine. This is a zone for animals, and the purchasers of it, this conservation, they don't want you to leave any kind of a footprint at all there at all. Now you can't carve paths. You don't need trails. If you go there, you put on a backpack and you wrap it around you tight, and you carry you a stick, and some people carry a weapon even, and of course, I think you should not do all that. You don't need to do all that. You got your good solid stick. You don't need much else, but you spend those hours. It's about a 6-hour hike. I'm talking about if you just go straight to Horsehead, the sandbar at Horsehead. If you just go straight there, and you and you sit there, driftwood. I mean, specifically this time of year, this is the best time to go. And you better hope there's a tree that's falling across the creeks. There's 2 or 3 creeks you got to go, or you're gonna get wet, which is, it is what it is. It's a difficult task. It's a mighty high level task to get through there if you've never hiked. This is a hiker's, and of course, people have died down there. I remember growing up, in the late 70s. I remember, I don't know. I think his name was Randy Hollis, I believe it was, wasn't it? Jesus, there's like so many people that you remember that were on this river and the boats and it's a complicated mess. I don't know how long it's been since that name has even been mentioned. I'm sure some people are saying it, but anyway, that's one of those guys that were a long time ago that had a beard. He spent time down that area. And all my uncles did. They're all gone. You know, they all spent time in this area, and they rode their boats up and down that river, and they walked up and down there and rode their, ATVs. But to go back now, all these years later, 30-something years later, and to walk through there, I mean, you can almost hear those old ghosts. I watch Popcorn Sutton making his whiskey, and I go off to these places and I see those old guys. I'm sitting there rich with William Faulkner in my head. I'm a guy that went to college and studied. I was heavily involved with language arts for a while, and I read vociferously and had some really great instructors that were that studied deeply into Faulkner and all this culture, this of where I'm at right now. This go kill the big bear, or you're down there in the forest and you're with people that know how to fish and clean fish, and they know how to hunt, and they know how to trap, and they know how to clean all these animals, and they make them ready to eat, and they know how to cook them and serve them with other things. It's either in the habitat, things they picked, or they call it hunted and gatherers now, and farmers, all that mixed together. I mean, most of them were all of that. Like, I remember back in school, there was something like, where there was first, hunters and gatherers, or gatherers, and there was hunters and gatherers, and then there were farmers. But then, of course, the reality of it is that farmers are also hunters and gatherers. People forget that. I mean, this is where I grew up. And, of course, I never was exposed to it like some of them were. I mean, I was there, and I saw them do it, but I never did really carry on the tradition because I went other ways. I went more of an academic route, and I did not ever touch that kind of activity for a long periods of time. And then I come onto your YouTube, and I see it out there, and I see it going on now. It's kind of a revival of those things that people lived, through as back in the 70s and before. And of course, growing up on a small farm, I remember those quiet days of just sitting out there in the middle of a field, with two creeks between you and your home, and there's nothing but just woods and, fields through those woods. This is not the delta I grew up in. I grew up in the upper timberlands, and of course you'd carve out your little special spot there, whoever you are, and you'd build you a farm, and you did what you had to do to survive. Subsistence farmer, as they called it. And people live like that, and things not changed for generations, just on and on and on and on. Of course, now everybody's adapted. All these farmers and all off the grid and outside the grid people, they all have their video cameras, and they show the rest of us what it's like to live. And a lot of things that I was just talking about, these guys that like in Canada, way off grid, and I can't think of these guys. I just started watching over the weekend. I watched them building cabins, and I mean, just the stuff that I watched as a kid growing up, except for I was there in real life. And when I go back there today, it's none of that going on. I travel back to this preserve, to this conservation area, and I just walk through these, woods. There's no trails anymore. Most of it's, there's some people have helped maintain part of it, but to get back there, way outside of the grid, you gotta walk across logs, across creeks. You gotta deal with snakes. You're going to see a bear probably, and you're going to have to deal with that, or you could, and you've got to, make sure that you can get back home. If everything's dry, if it's been a dry year, it's not that big of a problem. All the creeks, the tributaries are dry. You can just walk right across them. But there are times where you can't. And you get back there and you may have to spend the night in the river bottoms. You know, you better have something dry that can start a fire, you know? Something dry and something that can start a fire. You're going to be in trouble. You got to be able to eat. You got to be able to catch and kill and clean and know how to cook in those conditions. Because there's not always, you know, you see a lot of these, you know, these survivalists, and they got, all these fancy things to survive, you know. Yeah, I got a lumber mill right here. I can just carve it right up, you know. Yeah, that's expensive. A lot of times you just got poles, and then you got to cut the son of a bitch down. Let me tell you something. Cutting it down without a chainsaw is complicated. You got to have the right tool. But sometimes the right tool is just a human body in the woods, walking through there. Or sometimes it's even quicker than that. Sometimes it's just sitting there by the fire, like I was this morning. And sometimes, you know, you're just wherever you're at. And those quiet Zen moments sneak in on you. That's when the good Lord reveals himself to you. That's when he pulls back the curtain and lets you see what's back there behind. Kind of reminds me of that song by the Tubes. Well, she's a beauty, one in a million, girl. And she's right here behind the glass. But it's gonna cost you $1 first. Nothing's for free. I mean, you gotta get out there. You better prepare. Get ready to be hungry. Get ready to be dirty. You know, you may die. But I mean, you know, if you died being fat and old and laid up somewhere, you know, a bunch of tubes hanging out of your ass, you know. Or, you know, maybe not. Maybe something different. Maybe you die doing something you love. Well, of course, you got to stay alive sometimes. Get that money running for those kids. Keep them alive. Hell, I don't know. I don't really learn a lot from those quiet moments, except for to appreciate them. And I don't really, you know, I haven't been doing this for a long time. This is new, you know, to me as a, you know, I'm a Gen Xer, man. You know, it's been like, you know, I hit 20s, you know, instead of hearing whatever, we heard Cobain. And before that, we'd had Rock of Ages and rock and roll and come on and feel the noise and pop out the gazoo. Anyway, I'm walking through the mud now, getting closer to the homestead. I see again, February, still February, 70-something degrees maybe. All the bulbs are out, shining, doing their thing. The grass is, new green. I love it. Hope you're well. Hope you're blessed. Out.